Welcome everybody to the Sunday morning Bible class of the White House Church of Christ. It's a beautiful day outside. For those of you who are not able to be here with us this morning, but we know that you're logged in. It's a beautiful day. We've got a good crowd here and excited to worship God. I do have a couple of announcements, and just to start off, I looked up this morning and Danny's sitting here. We're glad to have you back. Thank you very much for all the prayers on his behalf. He solicited those a couple of times, and I was talking to him right before we got started, and the doctors are, it's amazing what they can do in medicine today, right? And so they've got him patched back up, put back together. Glad to have you here this morning. Couple of announcements for our sick, and we'll go over these again when we start our formal worship service, but Yvonne Stevens fell and broke her ankle Monday, and she had surgery on Tuesday. I don't have any other updates unless someone does here in the room. Our Debbie Shearer, sitting right back here in the back, is going to have a procedure on September 9th to assess some possible nerve damage. So remember her, nerve damage in her leg. So remember to have her in your prayers. Lisa Beasley's husband, Robert, had a heart cath last week and did require a stent. So if Lisa's here this morning, here in just a minute, remember to visit with her. And there's a couple of more that I won't read. There's some meetings that are scheduled for later today and so forth, and we'll go over those again. Anybody that we need to have an update on that didn't make it into our announcement sheet that we need to remember? Okay, well let's, before we start with our opening prayer and what we're going to do, let's remember we are studying the book of Colossians. And we've kind of had a little interruption, but we're back in it now full time, and we're in Colossians chapter 3. And today we're going to go through verses 12 through 17 as we march our way through the scripture. And just to remind us, Paul has had some good news that he's heard about this little church in rural Colossae, but he also has heard some things that makes him a little unsettled, and so that's why he wrote this letter. And he wrote this letter to the church to tell them he's thankful of the good things that he's heard about them, but he's also telling them, hey, I'm also hearing that there may be some different types of religious practices that are weaving its way into your worship service. Remember that this point in time, which is give or take AD 62, roughly 30 years after Jesus died. Okay, that's the time frame that we're talking about here. This church or this city had Jewish influence, it had Greek influence, it had all kinds, it was a kind of a melting pot of nations. And so everybody brought their own religious practices into the city. And where at one time every religious practice kind of had its form of service, it's starting to all kind of meld together. And it's weaving its way into the church. And it's kind of what we say, instead of looking to please God, we're looking to please people or please everyone. And so Paul is writing this letter, and that's what we're kind of talking about today. And Paul is at the point where he's making a plea to them. And he's saying, you once were lost, but were baptized and have theoretically become a new man, a new person, a new woman. But you're not always acting like it. And so he's reminding them that Christianity is not just symbolism. There's substance with it. So we'll get into that in just a minute. But let's go to have a word of prayer, and then we'll get going. Our Father, we're so thankful for all the blessings that you give us each and every day of our lives. We ask that you bless us this morning as we worship you. We ask that you receive our worship. We ask that we worship in the right way, that our worship is pleasing to you. Lord, be with us as sometimes we fail to be the people that you call us to be. We ask for your forgiveness, and we ask for your strength so that we may be people who walk in the footsteps of Jesus, and when people see us, they actually see Jesus. Thank you for your plan of salvation. Thank you for the church. On a local level, we're thankful for the White House Church and the leadership and the membership that we have here. Help us all to look outside. Help us to seek those who are lost and spread the gospel to them so that they, as well as us, can go to heaven when they die. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. Leadership is a word that we hear often, don't we? We hear about it from people on TV who are calling for better leadership in certain facets of the country. If you've served in the military, which I know we have many in here that have, leadership is the core that holds the military together, correct? Chain of command. Leadership from the top. If I were to ask you, who personally was the greatest leader that you've ever read about, experienced personally, have studied, who were some names that you would say tremendous leaders? Let's take Jesus and the Bible personas out of it for right now. General Patton is somebody that when I was thinking about this myself, it obviously came up, right? General Eisenhower. Winston Churchill. We've got Abraham Lincoln right there. For the sports fanatics, and if we had high school kids here, which they're in a different class, by the way, they may say Tom Brady. They may say Roger Staubach. You may even get some former presidents. Our church missionaries that have went out to different parts of the world that have sacrificed everything for Christ. When we talk about leadership and we talk about people, the problem that we can often get into is no matter what names we just threw out today, somebody somewhere can have something bad to say about them, right? Well, he was or she was a great leader, but you remember when, and the easiest is, Kimberly and I were talking about this, is she says, you better not say Tom Brady. There's going to be people that are going to talk about that cheating and Deflategate and all that. But that's a perfect example, right? A leader of men, but also someone who's got flaws. Tom Landry. You know, here's Paul now. Now let's bring this back into our message today. Paul starts in Colossians chapter 3 around verse 8 and verse 10. And he starts using terms, put off this and put on this. And now let's not forget that he has made the assumption through the letter that we're talking to Christians, people that have been baptized believers and decided at least conceptually to give their life to Christ. But he's calling them to do something more. He's saying in order for you to be this spiritual leader of the church, in order for you to be this Christian that we all aspire to be, it requires a new man, a new woman to emerge out of that old body. That baptism that you did must be put into action, he says. And he's giving direct things for the new person to put on and take on in order to achieve what? To achieve this Christian being, to achieve this spiritual maturity that we always talk about so much. We all know that it is the goal of everybody, and it should be the prize that we look for to increase in our spiritual maturity every day. Imagine a stair step that goes up to heaven. Every day we want to make another tread as we get closer to God every day. And if we're not, we need to do some self-evaluation. That's what Paul's talking about here. We're talking about, in my Bible says, the character of the new man. And I thought about that word. Paul did not write the word character. Some editor put it in my Bible, but I think it's apropos. The character of this new Christian. What is character? There's a lot of different definitions, but I've heard someone say character is who you are when the lights are out and nobody sees what you do. Who you are, not who you say you are or who you act like you are. It is who you are. Now, so let's even peel the onion back a little bit more. Who you are is dependent upon what? Who you are is dependent on who you live for. Am I living for me or am I living for God? So we've kind of peeled it all the way back to a little simple word called pride. And that is who we are. Have we successfully emptied ourselves from pride and filled godliness in that place? Right? We all aspire to do that. We all say we want to do that. But oftentimes we fail. We don't succeed every day. And these instructions from Paul in these 5 verses are designed to instill this quality in the Christian that's reading this in Colossae, to distinguish this person outside of what's happening in the religious practices of AD 62, to stand out, to set apart. And he's also making the exact same plea for us today. When people look at us, do they see Jesus? Do they see someone that's quasi-religious? Or do they just see skin and bones and a good person? The call is mighty from Paul in this book. And it's challenging. We read this book a lot. Our young people read this book a lot. Our college-age Christian universities read this book a lot. You know why? Because it's short. A lot of them have requirements that say you need to read 1 book a week or something like that. And so they whip over here and see these 4 chapters and they say, that's the one. But what happens is when we read the same thing over and over and over again, sometimes we miss the depth of exactly what Paul's trying to get through to us. So that's why we're slowing down, taking a little time on this. Any comments before we kind of move on from that? Okay, so Paul's calling us to put off some things and put on some things. And he lists here in verses 12 through 14, he lists a lot of words. And what I've done in your handout here is I've segmented these words into kind of themes, and I have given you the actual Greek word that was used, and supplied a little real-time definition of what that means. But I want us to look, not just reading the words. I don't want us to just read, put on tender mercies, kindness, humility, meekness, and the words go on, because if we're not careful, we won't stop at each one of those words and take a look. But what he does is the first two words he describes in these virtues that he is calling for us to put on. He takes the first two words and he describes how we are to treat others. So don't just look at the words. Think of it as this is how we are to treat other people, whether it's brothers and sisters here in the building, whether it's people at the grocery store or people that we work with. This is how we're being called to treat others. And the first word that he uses is tender mercies. He says, therefore, as the elect of God. By the way, that's a heavy term. The elect of God. That's us. Holy and beloved, put on tender mercies and kindness. What does tender mercies mean to us today? We don't use that term a lot, right? Well, Kimberly, I did pretty good on my tender mercies today. We don't use that. So what is Paul talking about? We have the King James Bible uses bowels of mercies. Kind of an interesting term there too, right? The term that literally means bowels, they were regarded by the Hebrews as the seat of the tenderer affections, especially kindness, benevolence, and compassion. So Paul uses this term bowels. We say tender mercies, but that word is the seat within you of all the tenderness that you have. Okay? Yes, sir. Okay, I'm getting there. That's a perfect translation. And so it's the heart of the tenderness that we have for other people. Okay? And I thought it was interesting. The Hebrews, the bowels for the Hebrews is the seat of the tenderer affections, especially kindness, benevolence, and passion. And then the word mercy, the second word, it describes compassion, pity, and mercy. So we may say today, is that the American Standard that said that? The New American Standard uses or translate that as the heart of compassion. We said already, who we are, our character, who our heart is. Are we a people that are rooted in having compassion for other people? Or are we people who are rooted in having compassion for me? That's the difference. That's where Paul's getting to. Do you truly have compassion, kindness? Do you have pity for other people? Or are they just getting in your way?
I wonder sometimes if God looked at us like we look at other people, how would we like that? Because He gives us mercy and love, forgiveness, and we can't do that for other people.
Yeah, it's almost embarrassing, isn't it? Paul?
Ephesians 4, the last verse says, be kind, tender-hearted, forgiving one another as God Christ forgave you.
Paul kind of echoes these here in a few verses down. Someone else. It's really a checkup for us. We know God says to do that. We know we're supposed to do that. But the question is, why don't we do it? And it comes down to this pride thing. I'm going to stay on that for a while. Aaron?
I think you heard what Paul said, and even when God talks about forgiveness, He talks about mercy, and He talks about kindness, He says, as you have done these things, so God will do them to you. So it's almost like the standard we set is the standard we're going to be judged by. If you'll be forgiven as you forgave others. And I think the same thing applies to the mercies and the kindness and the compassion. You know, it's a standard that, you know, we want one standard to be given to us, but then we want to have a different standard to give it to other people. But I think we'll be judged by that standard which we do.
Yeah, and we need more than we're giving out. I think all of us would say, okay, here's the measure of mercy that God is going to give us. You can have 25%, 50%, or 100%. How much do you want? It's not what I want, it's what I need. I need 100%. I know me, I know my character. I need 100%. Well, Brody, why are you only giving 25? I can only give you 25 back. It's like, oof. It's sobering to think about. Yeah, grace is kind of pulls into what we're talking about, because when it says God's grace is sufficient for me, what is that grace? That grace is the forgiveness of sin, right? It is looking past our insufficiency. But we can't have the grace if we're not giving it. We're canceling ourselves out. Now, I ought to be careful saying that with people on the internet here, because let me clean that statement up for those of you that are watching that are got your red pen out. God's grace is sufficient for the Christian who is striving to be spiritually mature and is doing everything he can. And it's when we fail that grace takes over the rest of the way. But what we're seeing here and what we may be seeing in the room today is, are we trying every day to be the best we can? Or are we just cruising through? That's different. Yes.
This might hit wrong, and I may say it wrong, but I feel like everything you're saying, I think us Christians are harder on each other and on the forgiveness part and stuff on that than we are to people outside. Because if people outside see who we are just outside the world, but people in the church know, okay, you're here, we see you out there, and you're totally different. But people outside of the church don't see that. They see you as, and so we're harder on each other, I feel. I could be wrong, but I just...
The perception is reality, right? And so the question is, are we harder on our brothers and sisters, and do we hold our brothers and sisters to a different standard than we hold other people? I think for those of us that have been in the church a long time, we would probably all agree with that. And at the same time, it stings that we have to say that, right? Because really, if you think about it, we should be more lenient with our brothers and sisters. Yes, sir.
I think Debbie's right, because you think about myself, who I'm hardest on is my own family. And we probably all are that, but I think that's probably human nature. We expect more out of those we love. And I think that's probably why we're so hard on each other in the church, is because we expect more. And that's going to get into something else you're going to talk about in a while, with long suffering. I've thought about long suffering a lot, but I think one of the reasons why we have a struggle with compassion today is, and it's probably been this way since the dawn of time, we live in such a cynical world with so many con men, con women, that it's hard for us to find compassion at times. If you wonder if you're being played for a patsy a lot of times by certain people. And so we're affected by the world more than what we want to admit. It's very hard. It's something we have to guard against and fight for. And sort of like we've talked about in the past, about examining yourself each and every day when you get up.
Yeah, I think the comment that sticks there is we are harder on our family than anybody else. We demand and expect more from our family. I'm the world's worst at that. I apologize as often as I can to Kimberly and my kids, but I must tell you it's not half as much that I should. Okay? It's a fault, and I think it's a fault that we all have. Let's move forward here. The next two words that Paul talks about relates to the state of mind that this new person, this new woman, this new man, this Christian must possess. So the first two we said were the way that we treat others. Now it's the state of mind that is embedded in us. And the first word that Paul talks about is humility. The King James is humbleness of mind. Must be a person that's humble, filled with humility. Yes, sir?
There may be a little more than we think in the imagery of what he's discussing here. And I'm focusing on two terms, put on and put off. It's clothing terms. There's certain things we put on our body that are personal and closest to us, even in sensitive areas. And then we put on something on top of that, deals with something more outside, and eventually we have the outside clothing that is mostly for others that we might see. So when we put on and put off, you start with that which is the closest, most personal, sensitive to you.
And to go along with that, it's because we're changing the character of this person. And when we change from a one character to the new character in the new man, the new woman, the new Christian, it's the most personal thing that we can do because we're changing who we are. And that's what Paul is calling us to do. So he uses the term now to talk about the state of mind. He uses the term humility or humbleness of mind. What does that mean? So I've got the word there for you. The having a humble opinion of oneself, a deep sense of one's moral littleness, modesty, lowliness of mind. Maybe we would say it as a humble person never thinks they're better than anybody else. Someone that has a spirit of humility doesn't see I guess the best way to say it is someone who's full of humbleness never sees classes of people. They see people. And they see people in the state where the people are. And they think of themselves as, I'm never too good to engage that person in spiritual talk. I'm never too good to engage that person in a conversation about how we can both be better. And we kind of use the word humble a lot, and I think a lot of us say, well, I'm a humble person. I'm pretty humble. I'm going to check that one off. But I think what Paul's challenging us is, has Christianity changed your level of humbleness over the years? Just like we're talking about becoming more spiritually mature, and every day you take that stair step up, is your humbleness factor taking a stair step down every day? Think about it that way. Or am I the same old guy that I was 20 years ago? Think about it from a measuring stick. It's the state of mind that we have to have. The other term that he used humbleness, and then he uses a term called meekness. In meekness, in today's society, can be looked on as a weak factor, right? A weak trait. Well, that person, they're just kind of meek. Not self-assured of themselves. Meek can, in our society today be linked to weak, right? We don't want to look that way. But Paul is calling us to have a state of mind that is meek. So there's the definition: gentleness, mildness, meekness. Is that the character that we have? Are we a gentle person? Wouldn't you rather be around gentle people than hard people? Hard people may be funny, hard people may be cool, but hard people will grind on you after a time, won't they? Have we all worked for hard bosses from time to time? Their job is to grind you and get more out of that wheel. We want to be people that are gentle, easy. Okay, hold on one second. Paul first, and then we'll come over here.
Meekness can also be power that is controlled. Power.
That's a good. Meekness can be power that is controlled. Yes, sir?
Oh, come on.
Thunder.
I don't believe that.
A little bit to what Paul said, is great power under perfect control.
Yeah, right.
And the best example I remember coming across was in a circus. An elephant is used sometimes. The trainer will lay down and the elephant will put his foot on his chest. All it would take would be a hiccup and he's history.
Great power that is controlled. So then Paul, he lists 3 other virtues in our list. And he talks about this is how you should act when you're mistreated. Well, that's going to get my attention, because how many of us think that we've been mistreated every now and then? Every day, whether right or wrong, we think that we're being mistreated somewhere, somehow, right? Well, Paul gives us explicit words and virtues about how we should act when we feel this way, because we are developing the character of the Christian, and one that is on display for the world to see. And the first word that he comes to is he said we need to be people that are long-suffering. That wasn't what I wanted to hear. I wanted to hear something else. Long-suffering people. So the word means patience, forbearance, slowness in avenging wrongs. Now, patience and the slowness to avenge a wrong and long-suffering. Why is that hard for us to do? We all know, I can speak for everybody in this room, we all need to be better at long-suffering than we are, right? So if we put a stake in the ground that says, yeah, we need to be better, I think we first have to ask ourselves, why aren't we better? What is it that is keeping us from being more long-suffering?
We've got things that make things so quick, the quicker they get, the less patience we have. And the term long-suffering and patience, I heard a lesson years ago. The Greek word was hupomeno, to bear up under. And he gave the example of Atlas bearing the world on his shoulders in mythology as an example of bearing up under the weight.
Comment?
Well, it seems to the church at Colossae is also doing a commentary on these verses in Matthew 5. Blessed are the poor in the spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God.
It's funny how the Bible tends to weave itself into one fine document. What never what never changes in the writings of the gospel and the Old Testament, New Testament, what never changes is what children of God are called to be. They're called to be upstanding individuals. These words that we're reading, they're called to be those. And they're called to be leaders. They're called to be special. Because God has chosen us as the elect of God, sought out, pulled out to be special for a special purpose, which is to spread His gospel and save people. And people that don't fit these words can't do that. And then it gets down to really what we're talking about here in Matthew 5. Why are these words chosen? Because we are called to emulate Christ. And that's who Christ is. What we just read in chapter 5. That's who Christ is. And we are called to be that person. We always say when someone sees you, do they see you or do they see the face of Christ? That's what Paul's writing this letter for. It's a daunting assignment. And that's why God says, few will succeed. Most will not into getting into heaven. Because unfortunately, most people will not make the commitment to change who they are to be a true child of God. They want the blessing, but they're not willing to change for it. And that's what Paul's addressing in this letter. He's writing it to this church that says, we're 30 years into this Christian thing. We're 30 years in. It is so important that we get off on the right foot. And I'm hearing that we're starting to sprinkle some things into the church that are, quote unquote, watering it down, getting it away from the first principles. And we've got to stop that and change that now. Because what we do now is going to affect the remainder of the world. And that's exactly what we're being called to do here. You say, well, the church is established. There's missionaries that are all over the world. There's churches on every corner. But really? There used to be. But it may be that the church of Christ, the church that Jesus built, is in decline because we haven't created the character within us of the new man. This is so relevant for today. It's not just, oh boy, they didn't do a good job back then. It is so relevant for today that we keep our eyes on what we're called to be. We've got just a couple of minutes, so let's kind of keep going because we kind of got stopped there with long suffering because, well, I need to be more long suffering. Then it says bearing with one another, to sustain with someone, to endure with someone, to care for someone. If I really care about somebody, are you going to stay the course with them? When your spouse gets hurt, when your spouse or your brother or your sister, your mother, your son, when someone in your immediate family gets hurt and they have to go to the hospital, are you going to do everything you can to be right there with them, to endure that with them, to be there with them, to help them however you can? Of course. But it's that same thing that has to come with everybody else, not just our family members. Care about people, endure with people. And then it says forgiving one another. The word, I have it there for you. It means to do something pleasant or agreeable to one, to do a favor to gratify, to grant forgiveness, or to pardon.
For me, it's one of the hardest things there is to do, because I don't know if this is the right statement, but it has to do with the degree of forgiveness. In other words, if somebody does something to me, I might forgive them. But if they do something to my family, and that's very hard for forgiveness to come in. So it takes a long time for that to. I don't think you immediately do forgiveness.
Oh yeah, no. Forgiveness is something that we have to work on every day. And I think we have to get to a point. Jimmy used the term, the degree of forgiveness. Forgiveness is either 100% or none. And I know what you're saying, because I completely agree. And that's where we have a hard time, because how many times, let's say me and you get in an argument, and you do something to me, and I get all mad, and I say, okay, I'm over it, I forgive, we're good. And then on the way home, I'm driving, I can't believe you did it. Right? We do that all the time. And I know how hard that is. Jimmy's exactly right. And I think when we look at an example like that, because we've all done it, I think we forget, or we take advantage of, the forgiveness that God gives us. Oh, it's embarrassing how much we fail God in our daily walk with Him. When we do things we shouldn't do, when we say things we shouldn't say, when we hold our brothers and sisters more accountable than we should, I guess, when we don't treat our spouse with the respect or we hold them more accountable than everybody else. And the Lord is up there looking down, shaking His head, going, I gave my son to die for him. And now he's acting like this. It must break God's heart. And that's what we're talking about here. We're never going to be perfect because we're human beings. And God's grace will cover us when we're not. But if we are dedicated to doing the right thing and to live our lives as close as a walk with Jesus as we can, keeping these words at the front and center of who we are, you know what's going to happen? That pride is going to automatically drizzle out of us, and the Spirit of Christ is going to drizzle in. And there's one chair that sits on this heart, and it's either going to be filled with pride or it's going to be filled with Christ. And if we are just bent on doing this, we're going to find ourselves with the Spirit of Christ sitting on our heart. And we're going to find ourselves a better guy, better woman. We're going to find, guess what? Life's not so bad after all. Oh, I've got bumps in the road, but God's going to take care of it. Jimmy did that yesterday, but he made a mistake. That's good. Who cares? And all of a sudden, we're going to live a happier life. Because when people are not happy, it's because they're not getting what they want. If it's not all about what we want, and it's about living for God, that we can control that, we're going to be happier people. The bell just rang. We will pick this up with the word love, which is an interesting word that Paul uses in his writing. And then we're going to start talking about the peace of God and how that works within us next time. So bring your handouts back. We'll use the same one next week. Thank y'all for coming.